At the time, it was the greatest journey known to mankind. It was the journey to the moon. In the late 60s and the early 70s, there was like space fever, space exploration fever. There was a sense of adventure. There was a sense of mission, a journey to that moon that we could see but had never been to. I remember being a young boy at that time, and a friend of mine in the 1970s had a telescope, and at night he would go out and look at the moon, and he would look at the stars, and I would be out there with him. I was younger, so I was just happy to be outside when it was dark. I thought that was cool, but he was more interested in the moon and the stars. Of course, we just heard that one of those astronauts, famous astronauts, Jim Lovell, died on Thursday at the age of 97. He's best known as the commander of the near-tragic Apollo 13 mission to the moon. Lovell was a veteran of 4 space flights: Gemini 7, Gemini 12, Apollo 8, and Apollo 13. It's interesting, we know that those astronauts, for the sake of the mission, they made a lot of sacrifices. I thought I would pull out one such example. They had to travel lightly. They had to travel with little with them. The ship was little more than an 11-foot tall cone-shaped capsule that served as a home of the trio of astronauts for most of their trip to and from the moon. It had a habitable volume of just 210 cubic feet. What does that look like? It looks like packing 3 grown men, in a minivan for history's longest journey, longest trip. And the cramped spaces and the weightlessness made living in space very different from living on Earth. Consequently, the astronauts had to make adjustments in various daily activities, including the way they ate and drank and dressed, and so on and so forth. With limited space, they only took along certain things, as I said. They had the scientific and mission-critical items such as cameras and survival gears and medication and oxygen supply and oxygen system. And then, of course, they had food and drink to give themselves sustenance. And then, interesting, they had personal items, and they called them a PPK, Personal Preference Kit. Each astronaut was allowed this personal preference kit with items in it like family photos, small mementos, favorite snacks, flags, and patches. It's interesting, the weight allowance for those personal items changed quite a bit over the years of the missions. Apollo 13 allowed 11 PPKs in the command module, each weighing about a half a pound. But by Apollo 15, things had really shrunk. There were only now 3 tiny PPKs that were allowed in the command module, and they needed to be 1/10 of a pound each, which is a huge reduction. It probably shows how much the priority of the missions was changing, with the scientific payloads becoming much more important and having much more weight. That was the greatest journey known to man at the time, to the moon. And of course, we know that we were rushing, excuse the pun, to beat the Russians to the moon. And we're very happy that we did. You and I are here because we got the greatest adventure there ever was. The greatest mission that there will ever be. The greatest journey that'll be known to mankind. No matter what the next journey is, AI or whatever it might be, we have the greatest journey. And that journey is the journey into divine intimacy, if I could put it that way. The journey into divine intimacy. All of us together, and each of us individually, are called to an intimate, profound, and personal relationship with the God who created the moon, with the God who created Earth, with the God who created the sun, with the God who created the galaxies and the stars so far away. Do we have divine intimacy fever, as they had space exploration fever back in the 60s and the 70s? I want to read to you, I probably said this before, my favorite quote. I'm going to read you my favorite quote. And it comes from the very first paragraph of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Have you ever read the Catechism of the Catholic Church? It's so beautiful. Now, you don't read it from front to back unless you're maybe a little unusual, because it's more of a reference book. And so you have a question about a particular topic and you go and you look it up. But, wow, go home and read the first 3 paragraphs of the Catechism. I'm going to read you the first paragraph. It talks about our divine mission. It talks about the adventure that God calls us on. It's greater than the adventure to the moon. And so here it is, number 1, paragraph number 1, the life of man, to know and love God. To know and love God. It doesn't sound that exciting to some, I suppose. But man, if you take a step into that journey, it'll blow your socks off. Hopefully it's blown our socks off, right? That's why we're here tonight. Here we go. God, infinitely perfect and blessed in himself, in a plan of sheer goodness, freely created man to make him share in his own blessed life. That's the end of the mission, to share in God's life. For this reason, at every time and in every place, God draws close to man. He calls man to seek him and to know him and to love him with all his strength. He calls together men scattered and divided by sin into the unity of his family, the church. To accomplish this, when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son as Savior and Redeemer. In his Son and through him, he invites men to become in the Holy Spirit his adopted children, and thus co-heirs of the blessed life. That's the adventure that we're on. That's the mission that we have. That's the journey that we want to end eventually in heaven. I'm going to ask you now, please forgive me if you heard me quote that before, and please forgive me if you hear me quote that a number of times again. Actually, don't forgive me because it's so beautiful. I hope you go home and read the first 3 paragraphs of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. That's the mission that we have, as opposed to the mission to the moon. That mission is infinite and endless and beautiful beyond imagination. So, if that's our mission, like the astronauts, there are going to be many sacrifices along the way for us Christians, for the sake of the mission, the journey, the adventure that we are on. We remember the weight allowance for the astronauts in their PPK personal items. It changed over the course of the Apollo and the other spacecraft's journey over those years. And so, what about us? Over the course of my life, how have my priorities changed? They had to have less weight with them because the scientific paraphernalia they were bringing with them and the cameras and whatnot became a higher priority. How have our priorities changed over our lifetime? I pause because it's meant to be a question that evokes reflection. How have I had a change in my priorities as I realize more and more, hopefully, in my life, and that I'm getting closer to the end of that journey for sure. But as God, in my relationship with God, has deepened, how has the adventure changed? How has the mission become more center in my life? That's a very important question for us to ask. You know, this brings us to our readings today. Finally, going to the readings. To the readings today. What did we see? We saw another journey, didn't we? In Hebrews chapter 11, a beautiful and long passage. Abraham's on a journey. Isaac is on a journey. Sarah is on a journey. Jacob is on a journey. And where is the journey going to? It's going to the promised land. But don't you like what it says there? Abraham obeyed when he was called to go forth out to that place that he was to receive as an inheritance. He went out, moreover, not knowing where he was going. Do you ever feel like you don't know where you're going in your relationship with God, or even in your relationship with your husband and your wife, your children, your life? Am I going to get married for younger people? What's going to be my career? Faith. That could be another topic of conversation for this homily. Faith in God. Because we're on a journey, we're on a mission towards God. And Sarah herself, although she was sterile, she believed to a degree. She didn't believe to a certain degree that although she was sterile and she was old and Abraham was old, that God could do a miracle. And God did do a miracle. They acknowledged themselves to be strangers and aliens on the earth. You ever think of yourself as a stranger? As you go to your home tonight, you think, I'm a stranger here. Or as you go out to work, this is my work. I've been here for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, whatever it's been, or maybe just a couple weeks. Really, that's an alien place for me. Now, it's not, because we know it very well, but there's to be a certain sense of strangeness, if that makes any sense, to living on this earth, that this isn't my home. There even can be a sense of uncomfortability, discomfort, because this isn't our home yet. And so it was that they acknowledged that they were strangers, and they were looking for a home that would be permanent, and that would be ultimately in heaven. And then our reading last week and this week, our gospel. Here's what Jesus said last week. Do you remember this? Sell your belongings. Give alms. I'm sorry, I'm on this week. I'm going to go to last week first. Last week in Luke chapter 12. Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. Oh, that's tough, isn't it? Battles over inheritance from mom and dad, grandma and grandpa. Jesus said, take care to guard against all greed. For though one may be rich, one's life does not consist in possessions. And then he told the parable of the man who had a great harvest. And he said, what am I going to do with this great harvest? I got to store it so I have something in the future. And so he tore down his barns and he built bigger barns. And then he put all his harvest in there and he says, I got it made. You remember what Jesus said? What Jesus said? He said, you fool. Tonight your life is going to be demanded of you. And all these things that you have stored up, who's going to have them? He says, thus will it be with all who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God. And then we come to our gospel today in Luke chapter 12, just after that. Jesus says, do not be afraid, little children. Sell your belongings and give alms. Provide money bags for yourselves that do not wear out, a treasure in heaven where no thief or moth can destroy. For where your treasure is, there also will your heart be. We live in an affluent society, don't we? We've got a lot of stuff. All of us different levels, but we got a lot of stuff. As you're driving along the freeway or the highway, you notice the storage lockers, right? I don't remember them when I was a kid. You notice the size of homes have gotten so much bigger. And I'm not judging anybody. God's the only one that judges. But we have to be careful because we're on a journey. We have a mission. We have a destiny. It's divine intimacy. And Jesus is saying, having these possessions, that can weigh us down so that we don't have our head in heaven looking for the life that's going to come that's never going to end. We could be too weighed down with the things of earth. And so we have to be careful. That's what the readings last week and this week, one way we can look at them. What would have happened to those who were astronauts on their space mission if they brought along too many possessions? More possessions than they were allowed. Weighed down, if you will, by them, would they have ever made it to the moon? It's interesting that Christmas Eve, 1968, as the Apollo was looking out, just a second here, I got to get my notes better. The astronaut Jim Lovell and his comrades, they read from the book of Genesis. It all belongs to him. The earth is his. The moon is his. The stars are God's. They all belong to him. We belong to him. We came from him, and we are on a journey. We are on a mission. We are on a destiny to be back with him. And how good it was that they quoted the first to 1 billion people, it says. To 1 billion people, as they were sending out their message, they each took a turn reading the creation account in the book of Genesis. What does it say in the first couple lines? In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without shape or form, with a dark abyss covering it in mighty winds sweeping over the waters, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. We belong to him. Let's be careful that we aren't too heavy, too weighed down by our possessions. Possessions can be fine, and they can be used for the glory of God. And 401ks can be fine and be used for the glory of God and for our good, and that can be the glory of God. But if we have too many possessions and we're too attached to them, it might make it more difficult for us to get to heaven. And it might make us more difficult for us to be more intimate with God. I'm not saying we can't have possessions. And God only knows and God only judges, and we can't judge anybody. We should never judge anybody. But we have to take Jesus' words to heart so that we're not too weighed down to get to heaven.